12. That number landed in southern Lebanon after an Israeli strike. 12 medical workers killed in a single attack. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, people whose entire role in a war zone is to run toward the wounded, not away from them. And the immediate question that follows that number is simple but heavy. How did the people responding to emergencies become the casualties themselves? We will get to the sequence of events that led to that moment. But before we reach the strike itself, we need to understand the environment in which it happened, because this incident did not occur in isolation. It unfolded inside an ongoing conflict that had already been escalating. Before we move forward, if thoughtful, fact-driven analysis matters to you, I invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can stay fully informed. Picture the setting in your mind for a moment. Southern Lebanon has been experiencing ongoing clashes involving Israeli forces and Hezbollah. Those clashes are part of a wider confrontation tied to the broader Iran-Israel conflict. That larger geopolitical tension forms the background against which events on the ground continue to unfold. In that environment, emergency workers do what emergency workers always do. They respond when people are hurt. They show up when buildings are damaged. They arrive when civilians need help. And on the day of the strike, according to reports from the area, those medical workers were on duty. They were actively performing their roles as doctors, nurses, and paramedics. Then the strike happened. 12 medical workers were killed. That number includes professionals across the medical response system, doctors whose job is to treat the injured, nurses trained to stabilize patients in chaotic conditions, paramedics who reach scenes quickly and transport people for care. All of them were reportedly working when the attack occurred. Think about the significance of that detail for a moment. These were not people far from the scene of conflict. They were present precisely because conflict produces casualties. And that detail becomes central to understanding the gravity of what happened next. Because when a strike occurs in a place where medical workers are operating, the consequences ripple outward instantly. Local officials reported damage in surrounding areas following the attack. Buildings nearby were affected. The impact was not limited to a single point. It extended outward, touching the surrounding environment. And when damage spreads across an area, emergency services do what they always do. They respond. Emergency teams moved toward the scene even as fighting continued in the region. That means the response unfolded in the middle of an ongoing conflict environment, not after the situation had stabilized. Let that sink in for a moment. Medical responders moving toward the aftermath of a strike while clashes are still taking place nearby. A short quote comes to mind here, something that captures the quiet weight of moments like this. Sometimes the helpers stand closest to danger. And in southern Lebanon that day, the helpers were already there. The strike itself is described in reports as an Israeli attack. It took place in the southern part of Lebanon, where confrontations between Israeli forces and Hezbollah have been ongoing. Those confrontations are tied to the larger regional tensions connected to the Iran-Israel conflict. So the strike did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred within a broader chain of hostilities that had already been unfolding across the region. But even within that larger framework, this particular moment stands out because of who the victims were. Medical workers, 12 of them, doctors, nurses, paramedics, all reportedly on duty when the attack occurred. Now pause for a second and think about the sequence that follows a strike like this. First comes the immediate impact, the explosion, the damage reported by local officials in the surrounding area. Then comes the next stage, emergency response. Teams arriving at the scene, responders moving through damaged areas, efforts to reach victims and provide aid. But in this case, the victims included the very people who normally perform those rescue efforts. That detail changes the entire emotional weight of the event. Because when medical personnel are killed during a strike, the loss extends beyond the individuals themselves. It also removes people whose work is essential during crises. And that reality deepens the shock of the number. 12. The reports from the area identify those killed as medical workers who were actively serving in their roles, doctors, nurses, paramedics, all on duty. The strike occurred amid ongoing clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah. Those clashes are connected to the broader Iran-Israel conflict, which has influenced the dynamics across the region. And because fighting continued, the aftermath did not unfold in calm conditions. Emergency services still responded. Imagine the urgency of that moment. Sirens, communications between responders, teams moving toward the site of destruction while the larger conflict remained active. The work of rescue and recovery taking place inside an environment where violence had not yet stopped. Another quote comes to mind in moments like this: "War reshapes the meaning of ordinary work." For doctors and nurses and paramedics in a conflict zone, ordinary work means something very different. It means treating the injured under pressure, stabilizing patients in dangerous conditions, entering damaged areas to provide care. And on that day in southern Lebanon, the people doing that work became the victims of a strike. Local officials confirmed damage to surrounding areas. Emergency services arrived at the scene, and fighting in the region continued. That combination of facts creates a difficult picture. A strike, 12 medical workers killed, damage reported across nearby areas, emergency responders arriving as clashes remain active. But there is another question that emerges when you step back and consider the timeline. Because events like this do not unfold in a single moment. They ripple outward. The strike happens, the casualties are identified, emergency teams respond, reports begin to circulate, and then the wider context of the conflict becomes impossible to ignore. The confrontation between Israeli forces and Hezbollah in Lebanon had already been ongoing. Those clashes are tied to the broader Iran-Israel conflict, creating a complex regional backdrop for every incident that occurs. Which brings us to the moment where this story deepens, because understanding what happened after the strike, the response, the damage reported by officials, and the continued fighting in the region begins to reveal how this single event fits into a much larger and ongoing conflict. And that next part matters because the aftermath of the strike tells us how the situation on the ground actually unfolded, and the details of that response are where the full weight of the event becomes clear. The moment the strike occurred in southern Lebanon, the immediate reality was devastatingly clear. 12 medical workers were dead, doctors, nurses, paramedics. According to reports from the area, they were on duty when the attack took place. They were not passing through. They were not distant observers of the conflict. They were actively performing the work that medical responders perform in a conflict zone, responding to emergencies, treating injuries, and providing care. And then, in an instant, they became the casualties. Think about the sequence that follows an explosion in a conflict area. First comes the impact, the strike itself, the force of the blast, the damage spreading outward from the point of impact. Then comes the second phase, the moment when people nearby begin to understand what has happened. In southern Lebanon, local officials reported damage in surrounding areas following the attack. The strike did not affect a single isolated point. Structures nearby were damaged as well. When damage spreads outward like that, it means the blast had consequences beyond the immediate target. Buildings, infrastructure, and the environment around the strike location were affected. And in situations like that, emergency services move quickly. They respond to the site. But here is the difficult reality that makes this story so striking. The victims were already emergency workers, doctors whose job is to diagnose and treat. Nurses trained to stabilize patients in urgent situations, paramedics responsible for transporting injured people to care, all reportedly on duty. A short line captures the quiet gravity of that fact. The hands meant to heal were caught in the storm. Now imagine the environment in which this response unfolded. Southern Lebanon has been experiencing ongoing clashes involving Israeli forces and Hezbollah. These confrontations are connected to the wider Iran-Israel conflict, a broader regional struggle influencing events across multiple borders. So when the strike happened, it occurred inside an active conflict zone. And because the fighting had not stopped, the response to the strike unfolded while clashes were still continuing. Emergency services still moved toward the scene. Think about what that means in practical terms. Rescue teams navigating damaged areas, communication lines active, vehicles moving toward the location of the strike, medical responders attempting to reach victims and assess the situation, all of it happening while the surrounding conflict remained unresolved. This is the paradox of emergency work during war. Responders move toward danger at the exact moment others are trying to escape it. But in this case, the responders themselves had been struck. 12 medical workers killed. The reports from the area identify them as professionals in the medical field, doctors, nurses, paramedics, who were on duty when the attack occurred. That detail carries enormous weight because medical personnel in conflict zones form a critical part of the emergency response network. When people are injured during clashes, these workers are often the first to arrive. They stabilize patients, they treat wounds, they move the injured to hospitals or safer locations. Their presence makes survival possible in moments of crisis, which means that when they are lost, the effect is not limited to the immediate tragedy. It also reduces the capacity of the medical system responding to the conflict. But on the ground in southern Lebanon, the response had to continue. Emergency services still arrived at the site. Local officials confirmed damage to surrounding areas, and the fighting in the region did not pause while these events unfolded. Picture that moment in your mind. Rescue teams arriving at a damaged location, reports coming in about casualties, communication lines carrying urgent updates, and above it all, the larger conflict still active. Another quote echoes the emotional weight of that reality. In war, even rescue can become a risk. That sentence captures the tension facing emergency responders in conflict zones, because every call for help carries uncertainty. Every response requires entering environments that may still be unstable. And in southern Lebanon that day, the danger became tragically real. The strike was described as an Israeli attack. It took place in the southern part of Lebanon, an area where clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah have been ongoing. Those clashes are tied to the broader Iran-Israel conflict, which has shaped the dynamics of violence across the region. So when the strike occurred, it happened within that larger chain of hostilities. But what made this particular moment stand apart was the identity of those killed. Medical workers. 12 of them. That number alone is sobering. But when you translate that number into roles and responsibilities, the meaning deepens. Doctors who diagnose injuries, nurses who monitor patients, paramedics who transport the wounded. Each one represents a piece of the emergency care system operating during a crisis. Now imagine that system losing 12 members at once in the middle of ongoing fighting, and while the emergency response is still unfolding, that is the moment the region faced. Local officials reported damage in surrounding areas after the strike. Emergency services arrived at the scene. Clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah continued, and reports from the area confirmed that the victims were medical workers who had been on duty. These are the facts that define the event. But events like this also exist within a timeline. The strike happens, the casualties are confirmed, damage to nearby areas is reported, emergency teams respond, and the broader conflict continues around it. Each step builds a fuller picture of what occurred on the ground. And in this case, the picture reveals a moment where the machinery of war intersected directly with the people trying to mitigate its consequences. Doctors, nurses, paramedics on duty, killed in a strike. Let that reality settle for a moment, because once the immediate shock passes, another layer of understanding begins to emerge. What does this event tell us about the broader conflict unfolding in the region? How does this single strike fit into the continuing clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah? And what does it reveal about the environment in which emergency responders are operating? Those questions bring us to the final part of this story. Because to understand the full meaning of what happened in southern Lebanon, we need to step back and look at how this incident connects to the wider war that continues to shape the region. And when we do that, the significance of this moment becomes even clearer. The strike that killed 12 medical workers in southern Lebanon did not happen in isolation. It unfolded within a war that was already stretching across borders, drawing in multiple actors, and reshaping the daily reality of the people living inside its reach. But before we zoom out to that larger picture, pause for a moment and return to the core fact that anchors this story. 12 medical workers were killed in an Israeli strike in southern Lebanon. Doctors, nurses, paramedics. According to reports from the area, they were on duty when the attack occurred. Those simple facts carry a weight that does not require embellishment. They describe an event in which the individuals responsible for responding to emergencies became the victims of one. And when events like this occur during a conflict, they reveal something about the environment in which the war is unfolding. Picture the situation step by step. An Israeli strike hits a location in southern Lebanon. The blast causes casualties. Local officials report damage in surrounding areas. Emergency services move toward the scene. At the same time, clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah continue in the region. Each of those elements forms part of the same moment, a strike, a damage, casualties, response teams arriving, fighting continuing. And within that chain of events lies the central reality of what happened. The victims were medical workers. Think about the role of those professions in a conflict zone. Doctors are responsible for treating injuries that result from violence. Nurses manage care during chaotic medical emergencies. Paramedics arrive quickly at dangerous locations to transport wounded people to treatment. These are the individuals who make it possible for injured civilians and fighters alike to receive medical attention. Their work often takes place in environments where the situation remains unstable, and in southern Lebanon on that day, the people performing that work were themselves caught in the consequences of the strike. A short quote captures the quiet gravity of moments like this. Even the healers live inside the reach of war. That line does not add new information. It simply reflects the human reality behind the facts. Because when medical workers become casualties, the story carries a particular resonance, not only because lives were lost, but because those lives were dedicated to helping others survive. Now place that moment back into the broader regional context. The strike occurred amid ongoing clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Those clashes are connected to the wider Iran-Israel conflict. This larger conflict influences events across multiple areas in the region. It shapes military activity, political tensions, and security conditions. Southern Lebanon has been one of the places where those dynamics are visible on the ground. Confrontations between Israeli forces and Hezbollah have been occurring there as part of that broader struggle, and it was within that environment that the strike took place. The attack killed 12 medical workers. Local officials reported damage in surrounding areas, emergency services responded to the scene, and the fighting in the region continued. Think about that final detail. The response to the strike happened while clashes were still underway. That means the emergency teams arriving at the site were operating in the middle of an active conflict zone. This is one of the defining characteristics of modern conflict environments. Events do not pause for recovery. Rescue efforts unfold at the same time that violence continues elsewhere, so the timeline becomes layered. The strike occurs. Reports from the area confirm casualties. Officials describe damage to nearby structures. Emergency responders move into the affected area, and the broader confrontation between Israeli forces and Hezbollah remains active. Each of those steps contributes to the full picture of the incident. Another brief quote captures the stillness that sometimes follows moments like this. War measures time in moments that never return. It is a quiet line, but it reflects the reality that every event inside a conflict leaves a permanent mark on the people and places involved. For southern Lebanon, this particular moment now sits within the larger record of the ongoing clashes connected to the Iran-Israel conflict. The strike that killed 12 medical workers is one event among many in that broader confrontation, yet it carries a distinct weight because of the identities of those who died. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, all reportedly on duty when the attack occurred. Their presence at the location reflects the ongoing need for medical response during periods of conflict. Their deaths reflect the risks faced by those who work in those environments, and the aftermath, damage reported by local officials, emergency services arriving, fighting, continuing, shows how the cycle of conflict and response continues even after a single event. Picture the larger scene for a moment. Southern Lebanon as a landscape shaped by ongoing clashes. Emergency workers stationed in the region to respond when people are injured. A strike occurring amid that environment. 12 medical workers killed, damage spreading into surrounding areas, rescue teams arriving while the broader conflict remains active. That sequence forms the complete account of what happened. And in stories like this, the facts themselves carry the narrative. There is no need for speculation or prediction. The event speaks through the details reported from the ground. An Israeli strike in southern Lebanon. 12 medical workers killed. Reports confirming they were on duty when the attack occurred. Damage in surrounding areas, emergency services responding as clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah continue. Those elements together define the moment. And as the wider Iran-Israel conflict continues to shape events across the region, incidents like this become part of the unfolding record of that confrontation. For the people involved, the medical workers who lost their lives, the responders who arrived afterward, the communities living in the surrounding area, the impact of that moment is immediate and lasting. Because even in the middle of war, there are individuals whose work centers on saving lives. And sometimes, tragically, they are caught in the very violence they are trying to mitigate. That is the story of the strike in southern Lebanon. 12 medical workers on duty, killed in an attack during an ongoing conflict. And that fact, in its quiet simplicity, is where this story ultimately rests.